Got it.
So thinking about kind of from a technical aspect, and I know that you've said like putting fast people together, like generally you're kind of bring the best out of them, which I think that's yeah, I would agree with that. Like the output's just going to be high. Um, but I know Dan is obviously quite a technical coach, and you've spoken about obviously you had like quite bow-legged, and he tried to do things to sort of impact that or have an intervention there. Were there any kind of like technical cues, be it sprinting or jumping, which you came to Dan and it sort of really resonated and you felt like it made a meaningful difference?
I think probably most aspects of what I did. You
Right.
probably look at me jump down. It does look very different. Now, there's two key things that I think really helped, especially in the lead up to London. First was we worked on a lateral penultimate step
Yeah.
before takeoff. And basically what Dan had always seen with me and what the sort of readouts would show is that as I came into the board, I'd hit the board as hard as I possibly could and then create as much sort of force going off of it. But of course, what you're doing by hitting the ball really hard is creating a lot of negative force, which you then have to respond to then get off the floor. And Dan had always sort of said it is actually, of course, the board is the catalyst to take off, but the movements prior shouldn't be you driving yourself into the ground to then take. You shouldn't have to feel a vast amount of force through your leg for you to then through and take off. It should be more of a case of running off of the board. And of course, there's some as you make pressure because you go from, and which was explained to me by Dan, you go from clearly being sort of ball of your foot through to toe running into a flat foot penultimate, which was created with a lateral step to roll onto the takeoff leg in order to use that as your takeoff inertia. And that was something that I'd never really thought of. I basically just ran and just took off. And I think that created inconsistencies, and as it does for a lot. And I watch a lot of jumpers still now, and I watch some of the stuff they do. And it was like, I mean, even when I'm thinking now, I'm just thinking, okay, well, another thing as well, we'll get onto in the set, but they just sort of, there's no rhyme or reason. And it's really interesting. You look at like a Mike Powell or an Ivan Pedrosa, and you watch how they start their runway. And now we're talking, of course, two of the greatest long jumpers of all time. Mike Powell is the greatest in the way of distance, of course. And they like did all this stuff where they sort of move their arms around, then sort of take a load of steps in, then they would start accelerating.
I recall that, yeah.
And what you would see, you see a lot of athletes trying to do that. But what you have to remember is that once you develop a fixed runway distance, so for me, it was generally around, depending on surface, wind, whatever else, 45 meters and 50 to 55-ish centimeters. That was basically what my run-up was, 20 steps. And that's what it'd be. And you're going, obviously, right foot to take off, right foot as well. Now, when I started with Dan, I used to do this little weird sort of thing, which I'd sort of rock a bit, take a few steps, and then I would step. Now,
if you're listening to this and not watching the video, I strongly recommend that you watch that just so you can see Greg's thing there.
If you watch some old, just watch that excerpt. And then if you want to watch it, watch anything prior to 2009. And I would do this thing. Now, of course, you're doing all that, and then you step forward to hit your marker. That changes, even if that only changes by an inch, but often
got some variation.
More, that variant is now knocked onto the board, and often people foul or they miss the board and everything else. I think probably if you ask Dan what we developed, I became the most consistent long jumper in the world. I just didn't really foul in the end, and that was because I've got rid of all that rubbish at the beginning, put my foot on the runway on my marker, which we'd obviously practice a couple of times in warm up as well, testing the track, etc. And I would do the same thing, and I would accelerate for 4, I'd transition for 4, and then I was up for 10, and then penultimate takeoff. And you drill it, and you drill it, and it was a pattern. And obviously we had this lateral flat foot penultimate into takeoff, rolling through the board. And none of this had ever been explained to me, ever. I ran as hard as I possibly could from gun to tape, if you like, from my start, with a bit of funny stuff at the beginning before I start running, and was obviously hitting the board as hard as I could, throwing myself through the air, hitting the sand as in whatever way I possibly could. And it was annihilating my body. The amount of times that I pulled a hammy on takeoff or overextending to get onto the board because the runway, there was no structure to it. People, I think, look at the simplicity of something like the long jump and go, well, you run in a straight line and jump into a sandpit. And I often joke and I belittle it in that way myself, just because it's obviously a very easy thing to do. But the work that we did to turn that into the most bulletproof runway in the world, and without question, I was the most consistent guy on the runway. I just hardly ever fouled. And if I fouled, it's because, I don't know, I got overly excited in maybe a major final or whatever else, or I tried something slightly new. But if I kept it to what we did, I generally got on the board, to the point where we then developed safe jumping. So Dan would literally say, first round of major, would I just put a safe one in? A safe one means back edge of board, which means I make the tiniest of adjustments before I start in order to get back edge of board, so I've got a safe jump in. And that's how fine you can get. Now, of course, when you get overly excited and you're in, I don't know, in my case, an Olympic final or something like that, as I had in London, Rio, where I obviously won medals, things can change a little bit. Rio, we can do a whole other podcast on my annoyance of that Olympic final, and still how that hurts me to this day. But generally, getting those consistencies in leads you to have a far better outcome. And that's something that we developed, to say, from the right. And that's what I was saying at the beginning there. When you asked what was there, as I speak, everything starts coming back. And then from that, now you're getting rid of, because this is now structured. Now I'm taking off, and I'm taking off in a better position, so I'm not getting hurt. We had to try and keep my penultimate down to 2 to 220, but the very most 220s at the edge of it. God, like, I think Dan had some stats where I'd take like a 260, 270 stride. Imagine how long and how far in front my leg was in front. No wonder my hamstrings were popping off left, right, and centre, because the amount of contact time you've now got with the floor, because it takes that much time to get you through, things go wrong. And then from that point, obviously the technical side of the air. Now, we did try and work on more. Now, me in the air, I was nowhere near as pretty as others that didn't. I never quite got that. And that's why I really wish I'd have been with Dan from, say, 18 or something. I think we could have really got there. But another thing that Dan taught, which was so important, is how to land in the damn sand. Because all I would do is just crash. I was literally like a meteor coming down to earth. I'm a heavy guy, so it was a lot of impact. I'd create this massive deep hole wherever I landed, and it was pretty much about just the width of me, because I just went down. It was just like a rocket landing in the earth. Dan taught me how to slide, and that was one of the most fun processes ever, to be able to understand how to take off, do your work through the air, land, and I can show it in this process, land 2-footed to then come round and flick out and slide through, to mean that you maximize wherever you land and you take away that pressure that you're putting on your body. That was a game changer for me, because often I would land in a pit and I would come out like hurting. You would check my hips. My hips would literally be out,
right?
Because I would have like forced up one side. So obviously everything cinches down around it. I remove that, removes the injury risk, means I can jump better in competitions more consistently because I feel good about it. I mean, it's unbelievable. Having a person who can technically break down the event you're doing and teach you the things that preserve your body is incredible. My injury rate went down. I mean, I was getting injured right down. Every 6 to 8 weeks, I was pretty much getting a hamstring tear. I then just had 1, maybe 2 a year, and we knew why that happened. That's the other thing. When it went wrong, we knew why it went wrong, and you work on stopping that from happening. It is one of the most freeing experiences as an athlete, to be able to step onto the track, perform, because you are effectively a performer for the people that are watching, and actually have the confidence in knowing what you're about to do could be something very special. And if that one's not, the next one could be. And then if not, the next one could be. Rather than when I turned up to competitions going, oof, right, well, I don't know, maybe, might catch one today, could be good. I might go over 8 meters today. All of a sudden, you're thinking about winning. And that's it's a nice place to be.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine from listening to not even just that answer, but the general theme that I'm getting, that what Dan offered you was that if I were to sum it up in 3 words, there was structure or strategy in terms of what you were talking about there with the specifics of the long, with the run up, with the landing, fun. It just sounds like the whole experience was much more fun for you, but also understanding. So even kind of going back, everything that you've said, but even going back there, that, do you know what, if something did go wrong and I did get an injury, then I know why it is, and we can learn from it, and we can put something in. We can now put an intervention in to sort of prevent that from happening again.
Yeah, massively, and they are the most important thing. And I say, like, the group that we had was brilliant, because a few people came in and out and left, but the core group that we had leading towards London, and then the Arizona-based group that we had, which I'd say was the second stage of me and Dan from sort of 2014 through to the end of my career, was incredible. The people around were great. I think Dan generally attracts a certain sort of person, and those sorts of people generally get on. I know there was problems in his earlier groups, and like what I always feature is like a super group. I know certain people didn't like each other. There's probably different times and whatever else, but at that period in when Dan still had a group and was doing all those sorts of things, and obviously he slowed down a little bit in that way now, especially towards track. Mm-hmm. It was a good group of people all enjoying what they did and maximizing their performance to whatever that would be. In my case, that's becoming a multiple champion. To others, it was breaking records and whatever else. Everybody was on the same page, and everybody just wanted to achieve, and everybody had complete belief in the system that was going to bring them there.
Yeah. Okay. You sort of mentioned a couple of times, you sort of spoke about sprinting, like when you're doing the 120s, and obviously I remember you talking about running those with a lot of the British sprinters like Dwayne Chambers, Christian Malcolm, Marlon Devonish at the time. As you said, in 2005, you were ranked, I believe, top 10 in the world as a junior in the 100 meters. If you'd have, how much sort of untapped potential do you think there was there in that domain? Like, do you ever kind of wonder, like, what could I have done if I'd have sort of like focused on that a little bit more? Not necessarily like as a regret, thinking, oh, I shouldn't have jumped, I should have done that, because obviously it's probably quite, or maybe you do think you could have had the same success, but obviously it's quite difficult to have the same level of success that you had in long jump in a different event. But do you ever wonder what might have happened in sprints?
Yeah, it is a regret of mine, actually. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously I wouldn't have had the same level of success, because certainly Usain Bolt was running at the same, that we had the same sort of career span. So
I think you had him, mate. I think you had him.
I nearly raced him. And that's, again, I was gutted about that. I was meant to run in, which one was it? Brussels Diamond League Final 2012. And I'd been given a lane. Okay. Yeah, I'd been given a lane in the 100. Because I got on really well with the meeting organisers it was at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'd obviously just won in London, mm-hmm. and I'd always said to him, like, one day I want to run in it. And he said, you can have the lane. And then I ended up pulling my groin, and I had to pull out. And I'd have loved, because I reckon I'd have had him to 30. And then after that, he'd have absolutely made me look like a child. But it would have just been fun to say I'd raced.
Yeah, of course it would. Yeah.
That would have been a brilliant story. But it is, you know what, look, there's a few coaches who know me well and have watched me train, mm-hmm. and they're sprint coaches, right? And obviously Dan is one of them, and obviously Dan's success in that event. I know what my runway speeds would get up to at times, and when I was in good shape and stuff, but of course that's still controlled. So I know where I could take my speed in a controlled manner. And I think I could have broken 10 seconds.
Okay.
And I know to a lot of people that is involved, what is this guy talking
Dan
about?
has said that to me. Dan had said to me he thought that you might be able to break 10 seconds. So I'm just saying that then to... Just so that there's somebody else that's sort of, yeah. Well, just like it's easy to get not carried away with your own ability, but just have somebody else that's maybe like being a little bit more I don't want to say being more objective, but somebody else that's kind of got a good yardstick. He's been around a lot of sub-10 athletes that has also reinforced what you're saying is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and look, I would jump in on block sessions with people at times. I would just say, yeah, run the 120s and whatever else, and I could always hold my own.
Yeah,
you sort of mentioned like so that the British crop of that. What year was that? Was it Soka University?
Something like that?
I think it was 2011. Yeah, Soka in California. So anybody that goes to Soka University is listening in. Like it was a good place to train. We enjoyed it there. And I really hope the video is still on YouTube, because I'll dine out on that anytime I see any of those guys, and we'll remind them of it. Running against those guys and beating them and managing to beat them, and that was something that it was in there. And I think maybe 2013, hindsight's obviously a wonderful thing, and seeing how my career panned out and the troubles I had in 2013, which led to a hamstring rupture in Paris, which was really tough for me. I mean, I had a tough year. Everything had changed. What people always forgetting that Dan had gone back to America. Jerry, my physio, who kept me together for 3 years before that, I'd gone back to Canada by that point. British athletics, I mean, I had no idea what they were playing at. Their view was, I remember the CEO, whoever it was at the time, meeting me and going, "Oh, we've got you a new coach," and sort of having no idea. Well, Dan's my coach, so this isn't, I don't know what you're talking about, and thinking that's how you do things. So my structure completely and utterly gone. And I think 2013 would have been the year for me to try and actually just train and run, because I'd been young enough, so I was 26 at that time. I'd had some outrageously fast times in training during that 2012 year.
Well, I also remember 2008. Sorry to cut you off. I remember 2009 indoors. You made the final at the Birmingham Grand Prix over 60 meters. So I mean, I remember. I mean, we'd been doing a bit of training with each other, kind of leading up to that. So I mean, it was literally you and then a guy that could run 11.5 seconds on an unbelievably good day, just sort of like rocking up, doing a few sessions together. This is pre-Dan. I don't think you'd seen your coach for a few weeks. Then you went out and you banged out a 6.6 high, or was it a 6.70 Windsor Slough and Eton at the just an open meet. All of a sudden you had this lane to run the 60 meters at the Birmingham Grand Prix. You made the final when the likes of Harry AA, James Desalu didn't make the final. So I mean, you're on that level. So just to really reinforce like how much or the size of the magnitude of the gift that you had for sprinting as well.
Yeah, and it's, now you look back again, I sort of look back at those years quite fondly and stuff. I just wish I had the opportunity to do it, because I effectively that I wasn't allowed, because at that time I was a Nike contracted athlete. If I didn't perform at certain levels at majors, etc., you're going to be cut. Competitions obviously all want you to turn up and jump, because I was the current Olympic champion. So they're inviting me to meets. They'll go, yeah, we'll give you a lane. You have to jump first though. And that is not conducive with obviously trying to then be competitive. I mean, jumps take so much out of your body. Trying to then go, oh yeah, I'll just throw on a pair of spikes and sprint with some of the best in the world. That's not respectful to them, and it's not the right way of doing it. Now, as I say, with this, that I'm not claiming in any way I would have gone out and beaten the best in the world and won medals at it. I think if I would have got in a relay team, I could have done, definitely. I think I could have been part of a very successful British relay team for sure, because I backed myself in that way, and I like pressure big time. That's something that I thrived off of, and I knew that I had the ability, especially at that time. We didn't probably have as many sub-10 fast guys, but we were relatively proficient at getting the baton around most of the time. So I feel like I could have slotted into a relay team quite comfortably. But yeah, look, I think if I'd spent all of the season of 2013 developing sprint ability, because again, you sort of touched it, I never really did it. Like I would do some block sessions, I'd do these bits, but there was never programming for it. Like it was just Dan. Sometimes often it'd just be me saying to Dan, like, can I jump in on their sessions? And actually, to be totally honest, often, I remember in Phoenix in particular, a lot of times we would have just finished a technical jumps day, and I'd just be all fired up because I'd have had a good time. And the great thing about training Arizona is it's hard, you feel good, you're in great shape, the whole lot. I'd have had a jump session, be all adrenaline filled, because I'm like, this is amazing. Watch the guys doing blocks, and I'd be like, right, I'm going to go join them. And I say, Dan, oh yeah, you can go do a few. And I loved it. I loved that pressure, being around the other people, being on the line, all that sort of thing. But we never spent the time developing, because I couldn't. You can't do it. The pressures that come with becoming the best in the world at your event is that you're not really allowed to do any other events unless you can. I mean, it's great if you're at 100 and run a 2 and whatever else. And of course, they take a hell of a lot out of your body, but they're very similar.
Yeah.
And especially if you're doing one-offs. I mean, if you're somebody that predominantly trains for the one, you can still run a fast 1-off 2. Like it's one of those things that it's so similar that you can do it. Whereas, I mean, you would remember normally when I would do blocks, I would sort of like jump out the block and then just start running. So because that was so powerful from jumping, I could generally get away from people initially, and then they would start pulling me back again. I remember sprinting in Hengelo. I'd done the long, and again, I was quite tired. They said at the meeting hours ago, she came up and she was like, can you just fill a lane because somebody's pulled out last minute? And I was like, oh God, I don't have any spikes. And who was it? It was the German hurdler. I can't think of his name now. Right. Trebor or something. What was his name? Really good guy.
Right.
He just went, well, I borrowed his spike. So
that's like a good guy, mate, just giving away his spikes.
Well, he'd already run. I borrowed his spikes. I hadn't done any blocks in I don't know how long. I think this might have been 2014, actually, I think this. And then I remember whoever was there, I just did a couple of blocks. Okay, right, fine, figure something out. Pushed out the blocks a couple of times. I was like, fine, yeah, I'm just going to get involved. And I just remember I was a bit like a tourist. I was just sort of looking around in the holding pen, like, right, guys, how are we going? And everybody's being really serious.
Taking photos.
Yeah, I might as well have been. And I think I remember that as well. I got out and to about 30, I think I was leading the race. And I think I remember getting out and leading and feeling like, oh, this is pretty good, actually. Some fast guys here. And then
I'm ahead of them.
Doing really well here. And then it was like somebody just shot me in my legs. I think all of the adrenaline started to wear off very quickly that I'd had from jumping. So I think I'd won the long earlier. I think I jumped 8:20 or 8:20 something, something like that. And then I just remember everybody running past me and just thinking, God, I wish I'd done a few more 120 sessions. But it's
during the race thinking that. You're just thinking 55 years, should have done some more 120s.
Should have done some more 120s. And technically, I'm not sure what I'm doing right now because my running does not feel very good.
But the line's just up there. I'll keep going.
But I'll at least finish the race. And I think around like 10:4 or something, or 10:3, something like that. Which actually, borrowing somebody else's spikes.
Yeah.
Not really warming up, and
it doesn't sound like it's set up for success.
No, not after a full set of 6 jumps, to be totally honest. But that was the thing. But do you know what? At times, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that sort of that you could be in an incredibly professional sport, and you could just have these really bootleg moments where you're just jumping in to fill a lane for somebody to help them out. That I think that also showed the fact that off of next to nothing, I could still generally run 10:3.
Yeah.
And the one time I then did it again on the boards in Newcastle on a cold day, I decided I'm going to enter the 100, and that's when I ran 10:26.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, that's off of 0. You know, I remember that week I agreed, in the lead up to that weekend, I agreed to run the 100 as well as do the long. And with Dan, Stu McMillan, and a couple of the other guys that were based out of Lee Valley, we just did a block session. Dan was going home, I think, the end of that week because it was late on in the season. We just did like a block. I ran out of blocks about 4 times, and I was like, "Oh, that'll do." And then we went and ran that weekend.
Yeah, I think I was living with you at the time there, and I think I can't remember why I didn't see it, why I didn't see the race when it happened. And I think you told me by text, or you text me. I think you text me assuming that I'd seen it. It's a pretty safe assumption, like in most cases. but I hadn't seen it, and I can't remember, there was some sort of like miscommunication. I was like, "What, you ran 10:26? You beat Christian as well, didn't you?"
Yeah, good old Christian hates being reminded of that. So Christian, I beat you, and it was a great feeling to be honest. No, but again, it was always again, huge respect for somebody that a remarkable talent like Christian. But that was for me. It sort of, I feel like it backed up a little bit that I could do it now. Rarely, obviously, because I didn't do it very often. But I could beat sprinters. I could beat them.
Yeah.
And that for me, I think if I would have really worked it and spent a long time, and again, if I could have tapped into Dan's knowledge of how to make somebody fast in that event, as he'd done so many times previously, I think it would have been a really special thing, and I would have absolutely. I mean, look, that year, 2013, I toyed with the idea of joining the NFL. I mean,
yeah,
I was doing some wide receiving catching with Tim Tebow at the time. I mean, it was like a bizarre year. Like the whole thing was just odd. And I wish now, the Tim stuff and that was great, and I actually really enjoyed that as, again, another sport to try. But I just wish I'd trained for the 100, really given myself a full season. I don't think I would have then, of course, ruptured my hamstring as well. I may not have gone to the World Champs, but if I'd have been allowed to have taken a year out, I think I would have had a great time in the one. But look, by doing that, I then obviously come back to 2014, have a very good 2014, 15, and then 16. I'm not a big fan of the officials in Rio, so yeah, there we are. But again, that's another conversation.